So, self-driving, electric, intelligent, these are developments in cars that we've seen over the past few years. But have we reached AUTOMOBILITY 2.0? BMW I says no. Please welcome to the stage Alexander Kotouc of BMW and Se-Min An of Rakuten Ventures. Thank you very much.
So, how's everybody doing? The energy is amazing here, isn't it? Huh? Yeah. Okay, so thank you so much for joining us for this session. Today we're going to talk about, what a lot of people are really wondering about. What is the future of, mobility? What is the future of, assisted driving? And we have one of the best speakers who could ever actually have graced the stage to talk about the future of transporting a person or a thing from point A to point B. Too long of a prelude, but Alexander, please, if you could kind of introduce yourself and also talk about kind of your history inside the BMW company. A lot of people who think about the BMW I think humorously we think about, oh, Mission Impossible, oh, that cool car and whatnot, but there's so much more to how the I embeds into the spirit of BMW. If you could elaborate a little bit more on that, and then we can move on to other questions.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and you made a very important point. It's 3 o'clock, and basically at 3 o'clock I'm always a little bit tired, so I would like to combine my introduction with something like a small experiment with you as the audience. And basically this experiment is something like a time travel. And you probably might now think, okay, now he's telling us what the future is going to look like. And basically this is what I'm going to do later, but this time travel actually is going back. Just imagine we are 11 years in the past. It's 2007. And you are all, as you're sitting there, you are the board members of a big automotive company. And you are doing something like a biannual meeting, and you have something like researchers and counselors, and you ask them about, what do you think is the future looking like? And those counselors are stepping in front of you. You are the board. You decide the future of this automotive company. And they tell you, well, dear board, listen, the first news is a good one. The need for getting from A to B is as old as Stone Age. And this need will be there in the future as well. And you say, well, it's cool, so our business model is still safe. And I say, wait a minute. There are a couple of more things we like to tell you. The first thing is there's something like CO2. CO2 is something that is not good. And good quality of air is something like a cornerstone of life. And we foresee in the future that the CO2 regulations probably go in a direction that we as a car manufacturer need to do something. First thing. Second thing is a thing called urbanization. You're living in a city, I don't think I need to explain what urbanization is looking like. But already in 2007, 11 years from where we're speaking today, there were 18 so-called megacities in this world. A megacity is a city with more than 10 million people living there. Most of them are actually in China. Second thing, and I don't know, but I think you all are aware, if you are driving in such a city, something like sheer driving pleasure, something that our brand is standing for, is probably not around all the time. Third thing is, in 2007, the iPhone was probably not around that much, but we already saw, okay, people's behavior towards digitalization and connectivity is actually changing. And the question, of course, arises, what do we as a company really do with this changing customer behavior? And the fourth thing is something that is really interesting. In 2007, if you asked people from, I don't know, Apple and Google, they were telling you, we want to build a car. And if you asked any car manufacturer, they were telling you, we are the new mobile device. So you could see both of the industries are actually going together. But what I want to do now is just imagine you are the board. You have a company that is 100 years old and is building cars, and you're highly successful. It's the year 2007, and you've heard all of this. What would you have done? Well, I think one solution would have been to just continue what you've done 100 years, because this is where you're best. And basically, this business model probably would have carried on for a couple of years. But I think we all know very intensively the examples of Kotouc and all those companies who carried on for too long with their own business model. So I think our company in 2007, so 11 years from now in the past, made a really bold decision. They decided we need an evolutionary path where we develop further what we already know what we're doing, but in parallel we start something like a revolution. We completely think mobility in a new kind of way. So we not only think and carry on as what we're doing as a car manufacturer, but we basically do something what we call visionary mobility. So we consider not only things that have four wheels and drive on roads, but we basically focus our things and thoughts about how actually people want to get from A to B. And this is where BMW I started. We are in 2018, so we have kind of experience until now what actually is changing. And I think you probably heard the figure in 2025, so for me it's only a couple of years from now. The BMW Group will be offering you 25 electrified vehicles. We already have car sharing services on the road. So I think the revolutionary path is quite developing good.
I mean, again, if I was the board member 2007, I'd say, which one's the path that's lazier, or which one's the path that'll cause me the less pain? But obviously, the 11-year, the 12-year prep that BMW has made for this journey has been well served, and we could see that through all your amazing product lines. I mean, one topic that you brought up that was really interesting in terms of you talked about is mega cities, about cities that have more than 10 million populations of density and whatnot. If you look at a country like Singapore, Singapore indeed actually has some sort of plans to actually build up its density and its economic power to a 10 million city, a city-state that's truly strong, dense, diverse. And then you have cities such as you say, some of the mega cities in Beijing and Shenzhen and whatnot, but you have cities also like Tokyo and Seoul who have already reached that density. What is the advice that BMW can give to a growing and flourishing country like Singapore to look at this is how mobility could look like? And I guess this is more in line with the philosophy of sheer driving pleasure. How do you make driving pleasure embedded into the lives of logistics and people living and having to utilize those mechanisms?
Well, we as a company, of course, we are always focused around one person, and this person is the consumer. So what we always try to forecast and make the best, I would say, an emotional kind of way, is to give you the option how to move from A to B. And so I think if you really want to change the way we are moving in the future, you need to find the most convenient solution for you and us as customers as we are sitting and speaking here, because this is the only way you will change your behavior. The interesting thing is electromobility is here as we speak. It's out there, you can buy it, and how many of you already are driving an electric car? Probably a few, but not all of us. Car sharing is available as we speak. So we all could go out there and probably grab something. You have the O-bikes here in Singapore. So there are different modes of transportation. There is a perfectly well, I think, especially in Singapore, public transport system. And I think the trick now for the future is to bring it all together. So the vision I'm having, and I can't give you an exact date when this will come, but the vision I'm having is for the visionary mobility, is something like probably a mobility flat rate kind of thing. So in the future, it doesn't matter what kind of mobility solution you actually use. You probably have your iPhone, you scan a code, and be it an O-bike, be it a car, be it whatever, you can just use it, and you're built on a monthly level for your mobility usage. Wouldn't this be something like a convenient solution to probably solve all your mobility needs?
That would be amazing, definitely. And I think one thing that I guess the crowd will be very, very curious to understand is when you think of BMW I, and when you think of all the other players in the market that are trying to be innovative, how does BMW I stand out in overcoming and actually flourishing with innovation, but also still remaining competitive to the customer? I guess what I'm trying to say is there's some solutions and innovations that we can over-engineer to the point where it becomes not desirable to the customer base, but it still could be so important. How does BMW I help BMW keep that balance?
Well, I think one really important thing is that in the very beginning, in 2007, we were treated as something like a startup. So we were given something like play money from the board, and they said, okay, you have like 2 years now, you can use the money, and then you show up and show us what you made out of this money. And we had really the choice, and I would say the chance to act as a startup. Because if you are a company with 100 years of history, you of course have something like, we've never done it like this, and this doesn't work. and you need to leave all this behind. You really need to start up from scratch and really reconsider how mobility is done. And this is how we actually started with BMW I. And this is, of course, the spirit we like to continue in the future as well. So the I in BMW I always stands for innovative or incubator. So we think of ourselves as something like we are a pioneer or something like a speedboat that is really going probably in directions where the entire BMW group, which is a quite big company, is not able to go with the same agility that we can as this small speedboat. And if we then find out there is something like a potential, we develop this kind of innovations and technology, and then of course we bring it to the whole group. And one really, really important thing is this little speedboat is allowed to go in directions that probably don't turn out to be successful. So we are allowed to make, I would say, mistakes as well. Because I don't need to tell you, you are all innovation people here in this room. You sometimes need to be allowed to make a mistake as well, otherwise you don't learn. But you need to be so bold that you say, but I'm still trying.
And when you look at kind of BMW I, and you know, for me, I humorously talked about the movie about how the I-8 would whiz around the street, and everyone would be oh my God. But in many ways, that's an inceptionary kind of action. You want to also influence culture in terms of how they look at automotivity and also how they look at technology. For you, I guess, not only for BMW I, how important is the cultural aspect of AUTOMOBILITY 2.0?
Well, I think the most important thing is always to focus around the customer, and then you focus around the culture. So one example is probably you heard all about autonomous driving. And the question I'm getting most often is, you are a BMW guy, your brand is standing for sheer driving pleasure. Isn't this like the biggest threat for your brand and your company? And I'm always standing there and laughing and saying, no, actually it's the biggest chance we had in the last 100 years, because it's a new way of how to reinterpret sheer driving pleasure. There always will be a steering wheel at a BMW, I can promise. So in the future, you have the choice, I can drive my BMW, but probably there are certain situations, for example, in a traffic jam or when the weather is bad, when we all are really happy to push a button and then the car or the computer takes over and brings you safely through the situation. And you probably can talk with your wife, you can watch a movie, I don't know what you can do in the future if your car takes over. So actually your choices you can do in a car and the way you see about sheer driving pleasure is actually moving forward. So this is what we think is our, probably you called it culture, our way to shape how we move in the future.
Wow. I mean, I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, like in terms of when you think about not driver assisted or the technologies that help you drive better in 2018 and maybe in the next 3 or 4 years, but how does BMW imagine, and kind of elaborating on what you just talked about, the next 10, 20 years of that journey, and again, building out, because what I think about when I think about autonomous vehicles is, or not only just vehicles, or it's a utility, right? But in terms of how you actually build upon that utility, as you say, is even in the most mundane of things, you want to build in pleasure, because with pleasure comes better productivity. Can you give us a little bit of insights on BMW's viewpoints on how that evolves in the next 10 to 20 years?
Sure. Well, two things probably. The first thing is that future is closer than you probably think. The one aspect of this future is, if you ask me personally, this future is going to be purely electric. So the combustion-driven engine, from my point of view, is something of the past. But of course, it doesn't go away with a snap. So don't ask me how long it still will be around. But we are guessing as a BMW Group company that in 2025, so already in 7 years' time, the market share in our group will be like 25% electrified vehicles. So each fourth car we then be selling and building is already electrified. So I think this will pretty quickly just happen. And in 2021, we will bring with the iNext the first so-called Level 3 autonomous driving car. Let me give you an example of what Level 3 means. In total, there are 5 levels of autonomous driving, so Level 3 is in the mid. Level 3 would imply that, for example, if I'm stepping out at Changi Airport, I could get into a car, push the button, and the car in 2021 would bring me completely autonomously in the city center of Singapore, and I could do something else in the time. Level 5, the highest level of autonomous driving, is what we call a robo-taxi. So we then completely, and in every situation, the car completely takes over, and you could even sleep in the car. Honestly speaking, from a technological point of view, we are not that far away from that point as well. But you can imagine there needs so many things to come together when it comes to the infrastructure. And you can imagine as long as there are still both human drivers and automated cars on the road and they interact, it's really, really getting complex. So I can't give you an exact date when that is going to happen, but I would say we all will see that in our lives.
Wow. I mean, when you look at even level 3, as you say, that you can get from point A to point B with less or little or no human interaction, is that also kind of a precursor to how, you know, a car company could think about their business model differently? And that, you know, later on, you know, I could literally share my car's time with somebody else, or I could really, you know, hail a car to my place and use it for 5, 20 minutes for that journey and whatnot. Is the BMW i also thinking in that perspective?
Definitely, and I think we need to think in these directions as well. So this is why I said it's the biggest chance that we actually have, because this whole autonomous driving features, of course, give us the chance as a BMW group to go into completely different and new business models that probably for the last 100 years just have not been around. Just give you an example. Normally on a daily basis, if I'm driving to work, my car is standing for 8 to 10 hours at my working space and isn't good for nobody. Why in probably a foreseeable future, I couldn't go to work, my car is standing there, but if my wife who's at home needs the car, she has kind of an app and she calls the car to her home and it drives back autonomously to my wife can use the car for shopping or whatever. And if I need to go back home, the car returns to my workspace.
Yeah.
This is, of course, something like a completely new feature. Or if you are sitting in the car and the car is driven autonomously, you, of course, want to do separate things because you don't have to grab the steering wheel, you don't need to watch the road, so you probably want to watch a movie, you probably want to do some shopping. And, of course, I think everybody here in the room already has ideas how you can make a business out of that. And this is definitely where we as a BMW i brand go in the same direction.
I mean, we're winding down about to about 3 minutes, but I know we have a couple of people from the automobile industry here. Is there something that, you know, if you could give, you know, entrepreneurs and also people in the industry a little bit of advice on in terms of understanding innovation that's durable for the company and for people using that brand and loving that brand? You know, what would be 2 or 3 pieces of advice you would give, you know, again, as mentioned before, young budding entrepreneurs or people in the industry that BMW has held to heart, but definitely is applicable universally?
Well, I think the best piece of advice is be bold. Go in directions where you've never gone before with your company and just try things. And I think the most important thing, and I'm repeating myself now the 3rd time, is focus around the customer. We are a company who probably are very engineer focused, and this is our strength. But at the end of the day, you need to emotionally really, you need to sell it to the customer. And every innovation has only a value to the customer if it gives you a benefit. And sometimes I still have the feeling that we try to make innovations due to the innovation. And we don't think too much about what is actually the value for the customer. And I think when you really have this, I always call it the snapping feeling that you actually deliver something to the customer, then your innovation is really going through the roof.
Yeah, I mean, I think like if people understood this I think it's one of the most important points that I've heard in this conference, but to be able to love your customer in your own way, in the right way, I think is the most important thing to manifest. And with that, you know, thank you very much, everyone, for this time. Thank you, Alex. I hope to see you more often. And again, Singapore thanks you for your hospitality and all your knowledge. Thank you very much.
Thank you.